Hello, everyone, and welcome to Kilowatt. My name is Bodie, and I am your host. And on today's episode, I got a chance to sit down with Freewire CEO Arcady Sosinov. If you're not familiar with Freewire, they design and manufacture DC fast charge. In this interview, we're going to talk about Freewire's approach to DC fast charging, which is a little unique. But before we get into the interview, I have a few things that I need to take care of. First up, we're going to do something similar that we did with Bart's episode, where we had a longer episode, lightly edited, and then a shorter, more succinct episode that's about 36 minutes. There's about 10 minutes between the two difference. So if you want the full experience, go with the longer episode. If you want the, shorter, just give me the facts, go with the shorter episode. I did this because Allison and Steve Sheridan, who are wonderful friends of mine and of this podcast, they were going on vacation. Allison does the NosillaCast. She needed some content. So I volunteered that more concise version of the interview so that she could play that on her show. And she's actually released it. So if you haven't gone, go to podfeet.com, go to the NosillaCast section, and check it out. I'll put a link in the show notes. But that left me with two versions, and I got positive feedback with Bart's interview when I did two versions. So I'm going to do it again. I'm not going to do it every single time because it's a lot more work for me, but I'm going to do it again this time just because I already have the content, and you can choose how you would like to listen. Again, go to podfeet.com and listen to Allison's podcast, the NosillaCast. In case you're curious, this is the condensed version of the interview, or as I like to call it, the Allison cut. All right, we have some patrons to thank, so let's go ahead and jump over to that page. I would like to thank Sierra, my Sierra, Dale, Dawn, Cameron, and Nate. You know what? I'm going to round this out. I'm also going to thank Mark and James. Thank you all so much for supporting this show on Patreon and Acast Plus. I appreciate each and every one of you. You are all super generous. All the money that goes into this show from Patreon and Acast Plus goes into a special account, and that money is just used to pay for the show. The show's actually, it's not expensive to run, but it's not cheap either. There's a lot of monthly subscriptions you have to pay for to keep a podcast up and going. So I want to thank everybody who does contribute. And normally I would give a Patreon or an Acast plug here, but I'm not going to do that. Y'all have been very kind, and we'll just leave it at that. Okie doke, let's stop messing around and let's welcome Arcady to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Brody.
So you are the founder of Freewire.
That's right. I founded Freewire in 2014. So it's been about 10 years now. And I started the company after noticing this surge of electrification in transportation. I saw the first few Nissan Leafs hit the road in the San Francisco Bay Area at that point. It was a very, it was a microcosm. It hadn't hit the streets of New York or London or Paris. And Tesla had just launched the Roadster and then eventually the Model S. And I figured I wanted to solve the hardest possible problem within the industry. And charging was clearly a difficult problem. So decided to address it.
Was there there had to have been a pretty significant hesitation of going from a stable job to a industry that really wasn't even in its infancy. It was pre-infant at this point with the Nissan Leaf and the Tesla Roadster. What was that feeling like for you?
It was a lot of fear, honestly. And I'd always had this passion for automotive. And if you go back to my childhood and teenage years, I was a gearhead. I actually, believe it or not, worked on cars every single weekend. My father was a taxi driver. He drove a cab for 26 years. Not owned, a taxi company. I mean, he drove a cab for 26 years. And every weekend we were doing something. We were doing oil changes, or I did a transmission swap in our garage. I did an engine swap in our garage. And my relationship with him was, I think, centered around cars, right? We just worked on the car every single weekend. And so I've always had a passion for automotive. I never kind of thought I would work in the legacy automotive industry, the big three, Detroit, didn't. But when I saw this kind of new industry forming, I said, wow, I can get in on the ground floor of something that's really exciting, something that a lot of people don't know about, something where I can learn a lot and sort of scratch the itch of working on automotive that I've always had. And I know you probably feel that I see the Hot Wheels behind you kind of on your wall. Sounds like you're a little bit of an automotive enthusiast as well.
I'm more of a technology dork. I don't have the ability to work on a car aside from, changing maybe a fuel filter or changing a battery out. That's the most complicated I get. Let's talk about the early days of Freewire. What was it supposed to be? What you think it was going to be when you first started it, and what did it end up as?
This is the little secret behind the name. What I thought Freewire was going to be is ubiquitous wireless charging for electric vehicles. And so what I actually thought we would do is lay inductive charging pads in road, so on highways, on every lane of that highway, and you'd be able to drive your vehicle, your electric vehicle, and charge it as you're driving. So you'd have these inductive pads that mate to the kind of receiver on your vehicle, and you would never actually need to charge because you'd be charged up by the road while driving. And we went pretty deep into that idea. I remember within a few weeks of founding the company, I actually flew out to Oak Ridge National Lab in Tennessee, where they had developed this what they call dynamic wireless charging. Dynamic just means wireless charging while moving. Where they had developed dynamic wireless charging and they had demoed it on a golf cart. There was a golf cart with a receiver. There were inductive pads in the floor. They would drive that golf cart over the floor, and the golf cart would be charged. Its battery would be charged as it was driving. And I just thought this was the most amazing thing in the world. I thought this is going to change. It's going to revolutionize everything, and it's going to, the electric vehicles are going to take off because of this particular technology. So I called the company Freewire. I started doing research. I filed some IP and patents around wireless charging, and then I got hit with a brick wall of common sense, you could call it, which was that it's very expensive to try to lay wireless charging pads in highway. At that point, I figured the cost would be about $2 million per mile of road per lane. And that's not including the utility infrastructure that would be necessary to support all of these different wireless charging pads. And I assumed you would need this heavy utility infrastructure per, let's call it, 2 miles of road. So every 2 miles of road, you need new utility infrastructure. And so you start to look at the costs of all that, and you realize, well, that's never going to happen. Not only are we not going to rebuild our roads, right? We don't have the wherewithal for that in this country, but also the utility infrastructure is just not there to support that availability of power. You don't have that much infrastructure and that much power, and you cannot deploy to all of these different locations. So quickly, I recognized, well, actually, there's a different problem that I've run into that I need to solve now. And the problem is that of the availability of utility infrastructure. If I can make utility infrastructure highly available, or if I can disaggregate utility infrastructure from charging, I can make charging more available, more ubiquitous. And so I started working through that idea, working through that problem, and eventually landed on batteries as a solution. It may seem like common sense today, frankly, Bodhi, but back when you look at 2014, 10 years ago, that wasn't an obvious solution. And going down the road of developing battery storage to enable kind of high power, ultra fast charging seemed a little bit crazy. I was laughed out of a lot of rooms. But I believed that there was no other way to do it because I had looked at every possibility at that point.
You talked a little bit about batteries. From what I understand, your chargers have a battery pack inside them. Is that correct?
Yeah, they have a very large battery pack embedded right inside the charger. It's a structural part of the whole system. So it's not a battery that's designed to support a separate charger. The battery, in essence, is the charger. So you're doing direct DC to DC. The battery is storing DC energy. The vehicle wants DC energy, and you're basically pumping out power as quickly as possible from your battery and filling up the battery of the vehicle. It's similar to the principle, similar to the hot water tank in your house. So you don't pull hot water from the utility, right? You pull cold water, and you have a tank inside your house that heats that up and stores it. And as long as you size the tank appropriately, you have enough hot water for your family to take showers throughout the whole day, right? Every once in a while, once a year, you may have your uncles and aunts and their kids come and visit and stay at your house, and you may run out of hot water that one time. But that's generally, outside the norm. That's 2 standard deviations out. The tank that you've kind of spec'd should be enough to give you enough hot water for the house. And it's the same principle here. We're just replacing H2O with electrons. But in effect, it's a buffer system.
Do these batteries connect together if there's multiple chargers at one location? Can, let's say, one's a little bit low, can the other ones bolster that, or does it have to start pulling from the grid at that time?
It starts pulling from the grid. So today, the batteries do not connect together to make one big battery. We do that via software, where we aggregate the batteries and we can bid their aggregate capacity into utility programs, but they don't physically connect today. And the reason we decided not to do that initially was because there was added cost in then running conduit between each of the different systems. So you'd have to rip up more of the parking lot in essence. Now, our next generation product, the Boost Pro that we're launching at the end of Q1 in 2024, that product will connect all of the battery packs on your site together. And so if you have, let's say, 6 of our chargers, you have about a megawatt hour of battery storage capacity on your site. And that provides some pretty interesting values.
On the current ones, if somebody pulled up in their Lucid Air, right? The Lucid Air can charge incredibly fast.
Yeah.
What kind of charge rate are they going to get?
Yeah, so you would get up to 200 kilowatts. That's the peak charging rate of the system. I've actually seen it go a little bit higher than that because the kilowatt number, it really depends on voltage and current. So I've seen, for example, we have a lot of customers with heavy duty trucks, electric trucks, and I've seen those go up to 206, 207 kilowatts, but right about that range. And it'll hold that power level throughout the entire charge session as long as the vehicle can accept it. Now, what you have to remember about the vehicle itself is that it has a very high power rating, but only for a short period of time. When you start fast charging a vehicle, the power will rapidly ramp up, but it'll only stay there for usually a few to 15 minutes and then start ramping down. And by the time you get to about 50, 60, 70% state of charge in the vehicle, you've really ramped down that power. And we take advantage of that, meaning that's the portion of the charging curve where we're actually able to replenish our battery pack and get it ready for the next vehicle that shows up, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question, is how, like, if there's people waiting, how are we ensuring that there's enough left in that battery for the next person that comes up? Now, is it 168 kilowatt hours? Is that what I saw on your website for you?
160 kilowatt hours, yeah.
160,
so
okay.
It's the question that everyone asks first, and it's the right question to ask. You're asking the question of, well, what if my aunt and uncle and their kids come and visit every single weekend? I'm going to run out of hot water all the time. So first, I'll tell you, I hope they don't come visit every single weekend. And likewise, in the world of charging, it's very rare that you have this large throughput of traffic. Now, the system is designed to do up to about 20 charging sessions comfortably without running out of quote-unquote capacity. I've seen it go higher. So I was actually just looking at data from one of my customers in Vancouver, and I saw that a number of their units did about 30 to 35 charging sessions yesterday, just in one day alone, 30 to 35 charging sessions. That's a heck of a lot of charging. you typically won't see that kind of utilization, but it's a function of Labor Day, travel, weekend, holiday, etc. But the point of the system is it's going to have enough capacity for the vast majority of charging sessions, charging applications, days of the year. If you are really reaching a point where your utilization is high enough that you're running out of battery constantly, then you're making so much money on that site, you need to install a second charger. So the break even is when you get to about 6 to 8 charging sessions a day. If you're seeing 6 to 8 charging sessions a day on average, you're breaking even. If you're seeing 10 to 15 charging sessions, you're seeing right around 10 to 20% IRR on that project. And you're incentivized at that point to install a new one. Versus traditional charging that's non-battery integrated, think about what you have to do. You have to first work with your utility and bring new service to the site. So you have to call, in my case, in California, PG&E. I know you're in Arizona, right? So you probably call the public service
SRP is
SRP. Yeah, and SRP would need to deliver you medium voltage service to your commercial site. That could take 3 to 4 years to get that service to your site. That's how long these projects are taking. And then once they deliver that new service to your site, you're going to have to install a very large transformer. That's your cost. Switch gear, that's your cost. A new panel and so forth. And so you've spent all of this CapEx, you spent all this time, and you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, well, now I'm going to install 8 chargers or 10 chargers on that new transformer. The fact of the matter is you're not going to see 8 to 10 times the utilization just because you installed 8 to 10 times the number of charging stations. It'll take you probably at least 6 months, but more likely a year and a half for utilization to ramp up to the size of your install. And that's a drag on your returns if you're a project developer. And so you're better off sizing your installation to the utilization that's there today, install that charger, start making money. And if utilization does creep up and you risk running out of the battery, install a second one, and then a third one, and a fourth one, and so forth. And that's what we find our customers doing.
Is there any advantage, like in terms of the infrastructure that needs to be put in place to go with Freewire, compared to any of your competitors?
Yeah, we don't require utility upgrades on sites. So we're going to use whatever power you have available on your site. Our typical customers are their gas stations, convenience stores, and these sites typically have a little bit of spare capacity, but not a lot. And so their choices are, I either use that spare capacity to install 1, 2, or 3 boost chargers, or I work with my local utility and bring in new power, which again is a 2 to 3 year project, and the costs are hundreds of thousands to single digit millions of dollars. And they're more and more so choosing that I'm going to install a boost charger. I'm going to use my existing power, no upgrades required. I don't need the utility to intervene in my project. And I'm going to get up and running and charging quickly. So the big difference, the advantage is I'm not requiring you to build out anything. I'm not requiring a new transformer or new switchgear. Use what you have existing on your site and then leverage that battery as your buffer.
And you said something earlier that I'd like to go back to. This would actually obviously be a little bit of a benefit to the grid overall because you're pulling mostly from the battery and then you're replenishing, I would assume, at a slower rate than what you would be pulling if you were charging a car. But did you mention that you can sell this some of this back to the grid if, like, during times when charging is slow, but the grid needs a little extra pep?
And we do. Yeah. And so this is the brilliant part. In fact, I'll give you just an example. I have a customer in Texas who at night they see negative pricing of electricity. So at night, because Texas has a lot of wind, we turn on our battery pack, we consume as much energy overnight as possible, and our customer is actually getting paid to consume that. They're getting paid to take those electrons, and then during the day, they sell those electrons to EV drivers. I mean, that's an awesome business model. I would do that every single day. But that's my end goal is, my goal is not to have the largest charging network in the country. That would be nice, but that's not ultimately what I'm looking for. Ultimately, what we are doing is deploying energy storage behind the meter. And this has been a holy grail, Bodhi, for a long time. A lot of companies have gone out there and said, we should install battery packs everywhere. Yes, in your home, and there are companies doing that. Tesla is selling you a battery pack that you can install in your garage. But actually, battery packs in commercial settings are much more valuable than battery packs in your home. And I know that's going to sound hard to believe to some of your listeners, because obviously at home it backs up your house. But I can tell you that if you lose power at a gas station or a convenience store, that owner is going to lose about $70,000 a day in lost revenues and in loss of product. And on top of that, the grid system, our utility grid at these commercial locations, that's where it's weakest. It's not in these residential locations. It's in these commercial locations where you have high consumers of power. And so having a battery at every commercial site is a holy grail. But the fact is, you can't just go in there and give the batteries away for free, right? You need to sell them. And selling a battery is a very, very hard task. You can imagine me walking into a retailer like a Chick-fil-A and trying to explain to them the value of a battery and its impact on your demand charges and its impact on your utility rate tariffs. It's a really tough conversation to have, frankly speaking. Instead, we don't go in there and we don't sell batteries. We sell you a charger. And a lot of times you're looking for chargers. You obviously see the incentives that are available for them. Your competitors are installing chargers. Your consumers are asking for charging infrastructure on your site. And with us, you happen to get the battery for free. And then we unlock that battery after it's deployed to sell energy back to the grid, to provide demand charge management, to provide time of use arbitrage, and a number of other very valuable kind of technologies and interactions with the grid that actually help strengthen the grid rather than hurt it. And that's where I get really excited.
So is this all controlled like on an app for whoever the property owner is or whoever's managing that? Or is this something that they need to set up with Freewire ahead of time? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, usually, frankly speaking, the site host, again, a facilities manager or an operator of a local convenience store or a fast food restaurant, they want nothing to do with this. Right? They don't want to go into an app to set their pricing policies, to set what time of day they can bid into utility programs and not. They don't really, frankly, often understand the concept of a demand charge or of peak and off-peak rates. And so they want to offload that complexity to us, and we do that. We tell them, hey, we've done an assessment of your site, and we think that by bidding into these particular programs and pulling energy at these times of the day, we can save you $4,000 a month on your energy bill. And some of that includes a value to the utility that they're then paying you for. And the retailer says, great, fantastic, turn it on. And then we turn on that functionality and we manage it as time goes on. So it's not anything the retailer has to look at or set or remember to adjust over time. We sort of just do it for them because they ultimately have a business run. I mean, they're out there selling you, Red Bulls and coffees and car washes. And think about it for a gas station. For decades, their largest cost driver was fuel, right? It was hydrocarbons. And they became, over these decades, very sophisticated in managing that fuel. They understood when to buy it, how much to store in their underground tanks versus how, depending on spot pricing of electrons. They understand how to price it to the consumer. Should I make it 1 cent more expensive or 1 cent cheaper than my competitor next door? So they became very sophisticated around the supply chain and the value chain of hydrocarbons. But now they have this entirely new supply chain of electrons. And it's something they don't understand because the language and terminology and the business model is totally different. just buying fuel, you're now having to decide, do I pull during the day or during the night? Do I go under this medium general rate tariff, or do I go under the time of use rate tariff? What does sending energy back to the grid mean for me? Is it a NEM rate or not? I mean, there's a lot of complexity built in here. And we go in there and we basically say, we're going to do for you what you've for electrons, what you've learned to do over hydrocarbons. And our battery inside the boost charger is like the storage tank you have for gasoline underneath your site. We're allowing you to hedge against these spot prices that move, frankly, even faster in electricity than they do in fuels.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the NACS connector and what that means for the charging industry?
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, as a consumer, I've been driving electric vehicles now for over 10 years. As a consumer, it is a better connector. Let's just put it out there. It is smaller, it's lighter, it carries both AC and DC on the same pins for all of your technologist listeners. Whereas the CCS connector, it carries AC and DC on different pins, which makes it larger, which makes it heavier, which makes it more expensive to build. So NACS is a better connector through and through. But at the end of the day, it is just a different plug, right? It's in my mind, it's like the lightning cable versus USB-C. Yeah, USB-C is better, but I also don't mind using the lightning cable. I've gotten used to it. So the switch from CCS to NACS is not really one of a better cable for consumers. That's not really what matters here. What really matters, it is the OEMs, the automotive OEMs, admitting that they made a mistake years ago not building out a charging network. Tesla did. Tesla did the hard thing, which was, we're going to need to build out our own charging network because there is no reliable and ubiquitous charging across the country. And the automotive OEMs outside of Tesla, the traditional ones, said, oh, we're going to let free market economics rule. If we get these vehicles on the road, they will come. And the they is charging networks that are reliable, ubiquitous, easy to use for consumers. Well, guess what? That didn't happen. And them announcing that they're going to go to NACS is, one, an admission of guilt, right? It's saying we made a mistake in not rolling it out. And two, it is giving Tesla something very powerful, which is now Tesla's going to be able to gather data from all of these vehicles, and Tesla's going to have a touch point with the consumers every other day. For an automotive OEM like a Ford and a GM, they yearn for those consumer touch points, right? They want you to answer their email blast. They want you to walk into the dealership and talk to your kind of representative. They want you to access their clunky apps. Whereas Tesla's going, well, they're going to need to charge every 2 days. They're probably going to use the Tesla app to do that. And I'm going to be able to get the lion's share of views from that consumer by getting them to access my charging network. So this is a very big deal for the traditional OEMs, and it very much weakens their position, right? Because now Tesla's going to be able to access their consumers almost every day, and that's not a position they want to find themselves in.
Yeah, I do have, like, when Ford and GM announced that they were going to do that, I was like, well, that's going to be short-lived until something better comes along. I am a little more heartened that the Society of Automotive Engineers are going to turn it into an actual standard, which a lot of the spec is already done by Tesla, so it's not like they have to work that hard at it. But the overall thing that concerned me the most was all of this adoption was happening in June and July, and there was no standard. I don't want Tesla to control the standard. I want some third-party independent group to control that standard. So
I hear your point. I would say that standards are what got us CCS.
That's true.
So I also would like a standard to be there and a governing body for it. But I know that when there are too many cooks in the kitchen, you get J1772 glued on top of DC pins.
No matter what we do, I mean, we're going to still have to have CHAdeMO connections, CCS2 connections for a very long time, because it's not like people are going to throw their cars away.
Which is ultimately, unfortunately, it's an added cost, and that cost is going to be borne by consumers. If I have to install more charging infrastructure to make space for a CHAdeMO cable and a NACS cable and a CCS cable. And I won't get full utilization across all those cables. Remember, CHAdeMO, I have a number of units with both CCS on one handle and CHAdeMO on the other handle. CHAdeMO gets very little utilization, nothing compared to CCS. But that's an added cost. That means my unit is less utilized than it otherwise would have been. And ultimately, that's going to be passed down to consumers in the form of higher per kilowatt hour pricing. So, from on the one hand, okay, you have the optionality and the flexibility for consumers who have those existing vehicles. On the other hand, they're all going to be paying more.
For those who don't know, like CHAdeMO connector here in the United States is basically a Mitsubishi Hybrid and a Nissan Leaf, and those are the two cars that use it. There might be some outlier that I'm not aware of, but those are basically the only two vehicle models that use that plug.
Yeah. And I would just be very direct. I frankly recommend all of my customers to not install CHAdeMO today. And I get a lot of flack for this on Twitter and social media. But the fact of the matter is, I'm very utilitarian. I honestly believe you install CHAdeMO on a site, the ultimate cost to that site host are going to be higher. And they're either going to not want to install another charger, or they're going to pass on those higher costs to the consumer, both of which are bad scenarios.
Well, let's say today I bought one of your chargers, right, and put it up in front of my house. I'm charging people. I have a CHAdeMO connector, and then I was like, "Oh, that's a mistake. Can I pay you to come back and swap that out with something different?"
You can, but it's like open heart surgery. It's pretty hard. People underestimate how difficult it really is. But you need to change the charging controller, the cable itself. You need to change on the cabinet the actual place where the cable goes back into rest, because now it's a different cable, right? I need to change the software inside the system to recognize now that it's CCS instead of CHAdeMO. I need to change all of our internal documentation for my field service team to know that it's a CCS unit instead of CHAdeMO. There's a lot that has to go into it, on top of the truck roll that ultimately has to happen. So, it is not a cheap swap. And again, someone's got to pay for that.
Sure. And then going forward, Freewire has adopted NACS. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. We have working units in our lab here. And so we're going to be launching it as a SKU, meaning that customers will be able to select CCS and NACS, or NACS and NACS, or dual CCS, starting Q2 of next year.
Right on. And will that go on just the new Boost Plus chargers, or will that be available on the current chargers?
The Boost Pro, yeah. Right now, we don't have any plans to put it on the current chargers.
Well, Arcady, is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't? Is there anything that I just missed?
I think it's, I spend a lot of time thinking of what this market and industry will look like eventually. And I think there are two schools of thought. And one is, we're going to see these massive charging plazas. In fact, an announcement just went out today or yesterday that Tesla has built a 98 unit supercharger plaza. And you've seen a lot of your listeners have probably been to the Bakersfield location, where you have just dozens and dozens of chargers. And those are great, but those serve one specific use case, which is when you and I, once or twice a year drive from San Francisco to LA, or LA to Vegas, or Phoenix to Vegas, right? Yes, you're going to need these large hubs in those locations. But I think the bigger market opportunity are a few chargers in every commercial and retail location. It's where you and I go anyways. It's the Starbucks, it's Dunkin', it's Chipotle, it's the supermarket. I don't need 50 chargers at each of these sites. I need 2 everywhere I go. And that's, I think, what the future of charging will look like. You're not going to need to drive to a special location. You just be able to charge on your way, and it's going to be available everywhere you go. And that's what we're building for. If that is the future you believe in, then having kind of a battery that's embedded within that charger makes a lot of sense. So I think the industry needs to think about who the true owners of charging infrastructure are going to be. I think ultimately the winners here are going to be the retailers. And because they've been doing this for 100 years, they've been able to sell you gas at almost zero gross margin. As you know, people are usually surprised to hear this, but there's almost no gross margin on gas. They sell it at close to cost. But they can make up their money inside the store. When you go in and you buy a big gulp and a beef jerky, they're making a ton of money on that. And I think the same thing will happen with charging.
For sure. Do you know, based on that strategy that you said, a few chargers everywhere you go, right? Are NEVI funds, are they available for that kind of strategy? Because I know they want them along, major roadways and things like that, the chargers. Is there anything that if somebody was listening and they owned a business, is there anything they'd be able to take advantage of?
Yes. So once you have deployed charging every 50 miles per the NEVI standard across your major highways, any remaining dollars in the NEVI program can be used at any location throughout the state. So, and a lot of these states will have significant amounts of NEVI money remaining. Now, that's on the NEVI front, which is, remember, a competitive program. But there's much more accessible and, in fact, in some cases, more lucrative programs outside of NEVI. So we have the what's called the EV charging and the energy storage tax credits underneath the IRA. And those can cover 50 to 70% of the cost of the installation. And they're not competitive. They're available to anyone. As long as you pay taxes, you can get these very lucrative tax credits. And so a lot of our customers are using those instead of going after NEVI, which is burdensome, takes a lot of paperwork, and so on and so forth.
Oh, that's cool. Well, Arcady, thank you so much for coming on today and discussing this with us. Tell us where we can find you or find Freewire.
Our website, freewiretech.com. And honestly, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. So if anybody wants to connect with me personally, you can find me. My name is spelled Arcady. Just type Arcady Freewire. You will easily find me. It's a unique name. So I appreciate it, Bodhi. I'm happy to be on, and we'll love to come back anytime you choose to have me.
All right. I want to thank Arcady for coming on the show. He was very knowledgeable. He was a good guest. He had a lot of information. I learned a lot from talking to him. And most importantly, he was a nice person. So Arcady, thank you so much for coming on the show. And with all the crazy stuff going on in the EV world and the world in general, I'm certain that we'll have reason to have him on again. So I'll put all of Arcady's links in the show notes. So if you're interested in following up with him or, just following what he's up to and what Freewire is up to, you can do that. It'll be in the show notes. All right, everybody, that is it for me this week. Hope you all enjoyed the show, whichever version you happen to listen to. I hope you all have a wonderful week, a wonderful day. What is it? This episode will go out on a Tuesday. So I will talk to you on Friday where we'll discuss Tesla's Q3 2023 earnings calls. All right, everybody, thanks so much. I will talk to you soon.